Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. During today's program, we will look into the largest Arab country, Egypt, and the challenges it faces amid regional turmoil and its significance to regional stability. To do so, I'm joined here in the studio with Dr. Shaul Shay, Director of Studies and a lecturer at the Institute for Policy and Strategy at the IDC Herzliyah. Welcome. I'd like also to welcome Ambassador Mazel, Senior Researcher at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Welcome. And I'd like also to welcome our TV7 analyst, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, Egypt has been a significant player for regional stability for various reasons. Obviously, one of the reasons it's the magnitude of the population. Give us a little bit of an understanding to this end.
Because of its geopolitical position, as well as its history, legacy, Egypt has several identities. It is Arab, it is African, it is mostly Egyptian, and as of late, it is almost trying to hide its Muslim identity. And what its current president, the retired General Abdel Fattah Sisi, emphasizes is that Egypt is striving for stability, both within itself, against various challenges, and regionally. And he wants Egypt to be considered an anchor for stability.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Shaul, would you agree with that?
Yes, I think that the first to describe the identity of Egypt was Nasser with the famous 3 cycles that Amir Oren mentioned before. But I think that, of course, the first priority is the internal stability. But Egypt, along all its history, was always a regional power. And when I look at the policy of President El-Sisi, he tried to return Egypt to the right position as a leading force in the Middle East and maybe beyond. And it's a part of his foreign policy.
Ambassador Mazel, when we're looking at President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and his various endeavors that he's been trying to implement in Egypt, we've seen ups and downs when it comes to his public opinion. We've seen various aspirations which didn't come into effect, other aspirations that did. How much of a significance do those challenges actually have when it comes to its standing in the Middle East?
Yes, well, he's looking for stability of his country, which is the most important, but his country is in a lot of troubles from the economic point of view. So that's the problem. You cannot become again an important country, regional power, when your economy is not stable and you are in trouble. He's doing what can be done, I think, in Egypt, and this should be understood, and it is not understood. Egypt has now a population of more than 90 million people. Most of them live in great poverty, out of the big cities, with not always electricity or water, not always health services, you see. How do you take 19 million people who lived 1,400 years under Islam, under the dictatorship of Islam, and you make out of it a developed country, stabilized country, especially after the crisis by the ouster of Mubarak and the next revolution with Morsi. So Sisi faces a very difficult situation. Still, I believe what I see that he's doing whatever he can, you see, but it's not enough because he cannot change the life of those so many people in such a short period. He's now being given a loan of $12 billion from the IMF, okay, to save him and to help stabilize the economy. But it is conditioned upon a series of reforms, very complicated. First of all, floating of the Egyptian Guinea, who lost 100%, almost 100% of its value. Then impose VAT, value-added tax. Can you imagine those things that do not exist in Egypt? And then cancel many of the subsidies. You see? And then change completely the civil service. And there is something that's unbelievable. In the Egyptian civil service, there are 6.5 million employees. They need only 1 million. And they pay $12.5 billion a year salaries. Now, so one of the conditions of the IMF was to change it. And a new law about civil service just was adopted by the parliament. So the task is huge. The challenge is huge, but it's very important that Egypt arrive to a certain stability and continue that.
Mr. Oren.
Sisi emphasizes the nation state. He talks about the Egyptian state, but also about states in general as distinct from organizations or movements such as we see with ISIS, with Al-Qaeda, and many others, which are now challenging the state. Now, of course, the Egyptian state in ancient times was one of the first centralized systems in entire history. And it is important for Sisi because of Hamas in Gaza, because of the ISIS branch in the Sinai, because Libya, another neighbor of Egypt, is also being challenged by ISIS. It's important for him, first of all, to stabilize the institutions of the state, which goes back to what Ambassador Mazel just said. He has too many employees on the state's payroll, but he wants to preserve the institutions of the state. Another problem for him, the national anthem of Egypt could have been All Men River. The Nile is Egypt. And now he is challenged not from the Sudan as used to be, but from Ethiopia. He is afraid that the dam which is going to be built in Ethiopia will threaten the Nile. So in addition to all of the problems that he had, and the 500,000 refugees from Syria, which were absorbed by Egypt and become an additional burden, he has this problem with Ethiopia. And only this week, Ethiopia blamed Egypt for trying to promote separatism in Ethiopia.
Dr. Shay.
I think that, of course, I agree with all the difficulties that were described here regarding the economic situation in Egypt. I think that these problems are leading President El-Sisi to a close alliance with the so-called moderate Sunni camp led by Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states. And indeed, we remember the visit of the Saudi king that at the end of the meeting promised generous donations and loans and investments, and including the bridge over the Red Sea
Sinai and
in Tehran.
Sapir.
So we have to look, on one hand, I agree that it's a problem, a big problem, maybe unsolved problem, the Egyptian economy. On the other hand, when we look around in the Middle East, it's a theater of 2 or 3 main conflicts, Shia, Sunni. I mean, the Shia camp led by Iran. The main battlefields are, of course, in Iraq and Syria and Yemen. But when we look at the other camp, it's true that Egypt is poor economically, but still it's the strongest military in the Middle East, except Israel. So the alliance between the Saudi Arabia, which as well now in some difficulties regarding its financial situation, but still a rich country, this alliance is a key alliance in the region. Another alliance is, of course, against the Sunni radical Islam, namely Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. And the third, which complicates Egypt with his ally and other players as well, is the confrontation between Egypt and the Muslim Brotherhood, who is supported by Turkey and Qatar and some other.
Ambassador Mazel, do you see a direct link of the influence that Egypt has on the Arab League, for that matter, which has some kind of say on various Arab procedures, to the Egyptian role on Middle East policy?
I think so. The Egypt League is something that all
Arab League,
Arab League.
yeah.
Sorry, that Arab League belongs more or less to Egypt from the beginning. It was founded in 1945 in Egypt. Most 90% of the Secretary Generals come from Egypt as the last one.
Nabil al-Arabi, yeah,
No, Nabil Arabi just left. It's
just left.
Abu Raid. Abu Raid. And I met him personally when I was ambassador there. Anyway, so the Arab League is important for Egypt because it's a kind of a basis, a kind of a mainstay. You see, for Egypt to push its influence along the Arab space. But still, everyone knows that Egypt now is in a bad situation because of the economy and because of the security problem in Sinai and Libya, if you like. So Egypt is a difficult situation, very complicated. And I think, as I understand what's going on in Egypt, that the people of Egypt, yes, still give their support to Sisi, while many of the journalists, media, especially foreign media, are against him because they cannot accept that he ousted a president elected democratically, Morsi, from the Middle East, even though all of us know that Egypt, that the Muslim brothers were going to build an Islamic dictatorship. So there is a problem. America, Obama, abandoned him, more or less. Obama, even a few weeks ago when he was in New York for the General Assembly, Obama did not want to receive him. So, I mean, there's a problem. And for Egypt, the United States was very, very important, yes. Still, they continue to give Egypt the military assistance of $1.2 or $3 billion, okay. But Egypt needs a lot of support on the technological, economic level. And this is not being given neither by America nor by the West, but the Western European countries. You see, there is a kind of a reserve toward this president of Egypt. Mm-hmm. And I think that he is doing his best, and he's a moderate man and rational man. But, you know, interest, way of thinking are more important. Still, Egypt is there. With 90, let's just give me one more sentence.
Please.
Egypt cannot have the same influence it used to have, right? Because of the situation that I just described. But let us look at it differently. If Egypt become really unstable, if Al-Qaeda, ISIS now, penetrates into Egypt and make it an unstable country and a problem of security inside Egypt in a very difficult way, it may create a crisis in all the Middle East and also in Europe, because there will be 20 million Egyptians will cross the Mediterranean to Europe, you see? And that is not understood. That's the problem. So this is why I say the West must help Egypt. Absolutely.
Which brings me to my next point on the matter. Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, came out in a declaration about last month where she actually stated that some kind of an agreement needs to be reached with Egypt when it comes to the Syrian refugees and refugees in general crossing the Mediterranean from Egypt towards the European Union. How do you see something like this materialized, especially that the agreement with Turkey is in question, the one reached with the European Union? Do you see something like this actually moving forward, or do you think that the incentives to Egypt will need to be very significant in order to make this possible?
Well, it has to do with the point that Tzvi Mazel just made regarding the relative improvement in what is happening vis-a-vis Europe as long as Egypt is there. But if Egypt collapses, we will have chaos of unimaginable dimensions, as well as what happens when Libya collapses. Because if the northern African coast of the Mediterranean is out of control, or if ISIS gets hold of it, then Europe is vulnerable. The entire southern coast of Europe, Spain, France, Italy, Greece, and then the hinterland, all of it will be vulnerable. And therefore, you are right. Germany and the others will have to pay, and will have to pay more than they wanted to pay. Turkey now, it's of course not even certain whether the Turkish EU agreement will go through because of Erdogan, but because Sisi is dependable, because if he gets the financial aid that he requests, he will be in a better position to control what is happening with the refugees. Yes, there is a chance there, but Sisi also insists that a political solution must be found to the Syrian conflict, which means that even though he was against the Assad regime, he is now willing to accept it as long as the conflict ends and no more refugees come over.
Dr. Shay?
Actually, in the last G20 summit in China, President Sisi called the international community to support Egypt, because the problem in Egypt is not just the 500,000 Syrian refugees. The main problem are all the African refugees, Eritrean, Sudanese, and others. And I'm right now writing a paper about the Egyptian policy. My impression is that Egypt is doing more than most of the countries to deal with this challenge on the legal level, on the operational level, on foreign policy. And for Egypt, it's clear that the challenge of illegal immigration will be on the rise, because more or less the European countries blocked the access or the route from Turkey, and the alternative is either Egypt or Libya. And because of the instability in Libya, most of the illegal immigrants prefer the Egyptian route. So it's a big challenge. He said that Egypt is hosting 5 million refugees. This was the figure that he said. It's different from the figures that international organizations are saying about Egypt. But anyway, it's for a poor economy like Egypt, if it's true to host 5 million immigrants, it's something very serious.
Ambassador
During my
Mazel,
time, they spoke about 2.5 million from
So it
Sudan.
makes sense.
I'd like to hear what you have to say about this, especially when the stability of Egypt is of significant importance, both to the United States as well as the European Union, as well for Israel in every possible scenario. When we look at this, why is the reluctance from the West so significant about cooperating with President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi?
It's a question of political thinking and intellectual fashion. That's the only explanation I can give about it. I mean, it started. I mean, everybody was happy, Obama and Western and European Union, when Mubarak, the big dictator, was ousted. Still, he was a dictator, but light. Let me say, you could not compare him to Gaddafi, to Assad, to Saddam. Absolutely not. Still, they were very happy because they thought at the time, Arab Spring, that everything will change, and that the young people of Tahrir represent 90% of the Egyptian people. But the few 100,000 or 50,000 of young people in Tahrir Square, they represented themselves. They were the only one in Egypt who had access to the internet, and they knew what's going on, you see? So Egypt remained as it was. And that the West, both sides of the Atlantic, does not want to understand till now. And then he added, sin to, there is a saying, to an error or whatever. He ousted Morsi, as I said a few minutes ago. Can you imagine a democratically elected president being ousted by a general? It's the end of the war. That's why those people, I'm saying those people in the West, they don't help him. They sell him some weapons. France sold him 3 battleships and 24 Rafale, you see, planes, but no help at all. So there is a problem. And now, just a moment, I continue on 2 more sentences.
Very short.
Yes, he went to Russia. Because he needs someone to work with it, to be in a coalition with it. So he went to Russia, you see? And Russia signed with him an agreement to build atomic and nuclear plant, you see? And also sold him a lot of weapons and some other materials. So there is a problem, a political problem in the West towards Egypt. And it's still not finished. It's still not finished at all. And yesterday, day before yesterday, you know what happened? Egypt voted together with Russia against the French-American proposition for a ceasefire in Haleb. And even the Saudis were not very happy. But they told them, what could we have done? America is against us, so we go with Russia.
This is actually very interesting to see how the vacuum of the West in the Middle East, primarily led by the United States, has brought about Russian involvement in the region. Mr. Oren, when we're looking at that, how much of a significance, considering that the weapons, as Ambassador Mazel said, that France actually sold to Egypt were supposed to be sold to Russia to start with. But that's a different story right now. We're seeing a lot of emphasis of Egypt, of other countries in the region, focusing on Russia, and how much of a significance will Egypt play when Russian support will be the only option?
American leaders, both in the administration and in Congress, are always captives of their own slogans. Now, they are being naive and hypocritical by looking for freedom and liberty. They are quoting from their own songs and anthems, knowing full well that it is an unattainable goal, that in the third world, including in the Middle East, Israel is the exception, you cannot have a freely elected government which will then give the power back to the people once its term is over. Now, when Sisi was in New York, as Tzvi Mazel mentioned, in late September, he addressed the General Assembly. And if one looks at his statement, one word is not to be found there: Muslim. He speaks only of Arab. This is the Arab Republic of Egypt, of course. But the word Muslim is not there because Muslim is not a nice word now in the United States. One does not speak of Islam, especially before the elections. All of this goes to say that it's very nice to have relations with France and with Russia and others. But ever since Sadat turned from the Soviet Union towards the United States, Sisi is also going to be dependent on the Americans. We have to wait and see what happens a month from now regarding the next president. But it's good for him to have someone like Putin, but eventually he has to revert to the Americans.
Dr. Shay?
I think that President Sisi learned the lessons from the American embargo on the arms supply that happened to him shortly after he was elected. So on the military level, the policy or the strategy of Egypt is to diversify the sources. And the main suppliers now are France on one hand, Russia on the other hand, and still with the $1.2 billion US. But regarding the economical support, there is another player that was not mentioned here, it's China. China just last week, they signed a contract that China will build the new capital, the new Cairo. And I would like to mention that one of the strategies of President Sisi is to go to mega projects. It was unbelievable that within 1 year, we have 2 Suez canals, not just one. it's not so beneficial so far economically, but it's a matter of time.
In the future.
In the future, in the long term, I think that it's a correct investment. He tried to build a nuclear energy planet to overcome the electricity shortage in Egypt. He tried to build a new capital to give more jobs to the unemployment in Egypt. So he tried to do indeed things that President Mubarak during more than 20 years was not strong enough to do.
Ambassador Mazel?
Yes. You know, I mentioned in the beginning the fact that it was just given, it's going to be given $12 billion by the IMF. In conditions on a few
Reforms.
things to be done, reforms. They are very difficult. It's going to be a difficult period, a dangerous period in Egypt because prices, when the guinea, the Egyptian pound will float, prices will go out. When some of the subsidies will be cancelled, the prices will go up. So what's going to happen? People are now, at that moment, at present, they are quite, even very, very poor. Many of them, most of them. So a few weeks ago, Sisi, in one of his speeches, explained it to his people. And they did not say no. He said, listen, what's going to happen in Egypt in the coming months and maybe 2 years, it will be very difficult. Prices will be up. You will suffer. It will be terrible. But this is the operation to be carried out. Otherwise, we'll stay all our life in the foreseeable future. At least we'll be poor, we'll be miserable, and we'll be destabilized to the end of Egypt. You have to suffer. You will suffer, and it's my way of telling you what's going to happen. And it's going to happen because at the end of October, the agreement with the IMF will be signed. Money will start pouring into Egypt, but on condition that all those things that I said will be carried out.
Well, we're running out of time, so Mr. Oren, please.
Yes, just in shorthand, we didn't have time to mention the excellent relationship between Egypt and Israel on the security front because of what is happening in the Sinai. But this, again, is dependent on Israel being moderate on the political front. And Sisi is always calling on Israel to adhere to the Arab peace plan of 2002. Up to now, he hasn't had much success there.
Nevertheless, there's always a future before us, so I would like to thank Dr. Shaul Shay for coming here. Mr. Amir Oren, thank you so very much. Ambassador Tzvi Mazel, it's been a pleasure. I'd like to thank our viewers, and we will see you next week.